Hello Canada, welcome back to another edition of the Canadian Citizen Journal. I'm your host, Alias Tagay. Well, a recent, a lot of papers are pushing this, but research has just come out and they put together a real climate model. Now this isn't like a fictitious computer program. This is real scientists from all different spectrums, using from everything from geology and like just every single aspect to come up with the most accurate reading of Earth's temperature over the last 485 million years. And let's just say this is an atomic bomb that's going to go off. Hopefully, if you like, share, and subscribe, and help get this out there and destroy the global green cartel. They don't care about you. They don't care about the environment. Now, I had reported months ago when NASA had released information on a study that they did using satellite technology. And it proved that Canada isn't just carbon neutral. And we're not just a carbon sink. We are a carbon vacuum. Like, we absorb crazy amounts. Now, there are scientists that are currently trying to put all of this data together because, well, now they have to actually break everything down into numbers. This is where, like, there's going to be piles and piles of different mathematicians, just people who are brilliant, trying to put these numbers together to actually say, well, how much carbon are you absorbing? But what we do know is every single person who screams, the end is nigh, the sky is falling, climate change, shut off your cars, stop pipelines. This just proves they are all quackers. Period. Take it to the presses. When NASA brought this out, I showed it. That was way back in May. And, of course, mainstream didn't talk about it. But let's dive into this report, and what you're going to see is going to blow your mind. 485 million years of the Earth's surface temperature. So it goes and breaks everything right down. Understanding how global mean surface temperature has varied over the past 500 million years, a time in which evolutionary patterns of flora and fauna have had such an important influence on the evolution of climate, is essential for understanding the process driving climate over that interval. Jaudet et al. Presented a record of GMST over the past 485 million years that they have constructed by combining proxy data with climate modeling, see the perspective by Mills, and that they have found GMST varied over a range of 11 to 36 degrees Celsius with an apparent climate sensitivity of, drumroll, 8 degrees Celsius. About 2 or 3 times what it is today. Now, they go right into it and they talk about all the results and the geologists and all the rest of the, and they break down into all of the different areas, right? And of course, they regulated it through, of course, 485 million years. Like, this is epic long, people. I mean, epic long. But if you take a very close look at this chart, I'll blow it up here for you. You can see very clearly, way over here, on the far right side, that's where we are today in the Cenozoic period. It's colder now than it has been for the last 485 million years. They even, when they modeled this, broke it down. And if you look at the top, you can actually see they rate the actual climate during these cycles. Now, of course, the Paleozoic, the Mesozoic, this is where like the dinosaurs were, humans came about, right? Like there's all of this. I mean, this is stretched out over a long, long time. The peaks, if you check them out, happen to line up with, funny thing, the most green the Earth was. So pretty much the highest temperatures was where life was at its peak, and that is animal life and plant life. Now, when all these scientists come out, and I've mentioned this on previous episodes, about how the Earth is actually greening, and people and scientists and countries are seeing this in real time, you have to remember, it was only 4,000 years ago, Africa was a tropical jungle. It had the largest freshwater lake in the world. In fact, it was so big, you could put all of Canada and the United States Great Lakes in it. 4,000 years. There was no diesel engines. There were no jet planes. There were no speedboats, skidoos, quads, big trucks with lift kits. This was the real climate change. And now there's piles of factors that go into this. Everything from, like none of this is really natural as you can call it natural can be. Because all it takes is for an interplanetary, explosion to kind of throw some crap at us, and when we get hit a couple times, well, it blackens the sky and we drop into a cold climate. And it goes the opposite way. It could very well be that solar flares peaked during a long period of time that caused temperatures to rise. There are more exterior influences by far affecting our planet and its climate than humans could ever even think and take credit for themselves. This model, like I said, just shattered Carney and all of his green cult zealots and exposes the reality. There are more scientists that do not believe in scare, fearmonger climate change. You only hear about the ones that propaganda is trying to put out to you. Now, moving on to NASA, and you can find this right on NASA, the NASA site. And again, I post everything in the description below so you guys have access to all of this information. That's why I created the channel. Just the truth. Sorry, just the truth. Just the facts. NASA space mission takes stock of carbon dioxide emissions by country. Now, of course, it goes on and on and on, and it explains, the international study and how it was conducted, and included like 60 researchers, and it goes blah, 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 blah. I'm going to actually show you in real time what they saw, so it's easier to kind of grasp. Now, this goes for 5 years. And if you take a very close look at the chart, if it is neutral, white, beigeish, pinkish, taupish, you're zero. You are neutral. Means you're not putting out more than you take in. So in other words, whatever you produce, pretty much your country is also absorbing. The further you go to the right of the spectrum, going into the autumn colors and then to red, obviously the more CO2 you are producing. The further left you go on the chart, which goes from moss colors into dark greens, all the way to emerald, means you are absorbing. Now, pay close attention because we had a couple peak fire seasons during this 5-year recorded evidence. I'm going to play this for you. 2015. 2016. Do you notice something? We got a little darker. 2017. We got a little darker. 2018. We had a few fires that year. Keep going. 2019. Whoa, we just recovered, didn't we? That's incredible. 2020. You can see clear as day, we are so far left on this spectrum. We are within the last 7 blocks to the left, mostly migrating within the furthest 5, kind of back and forth. We are the Hoover of carbon. I mean, hello, people. Now pay close attention to some of the other green nations as I play this again. You can see Latin America, Russia. You can see the fluctuations. Do you see how they correlate to each other geographically along where they are on the planet? This is the closest thing to real climate science that you can get. It's showing that during dry years where there are fires, it seems Russia has them as well. They correlate, as well as the fact that everything within the northern hemisphere and everything within the southern hemisphere seem to be directly correlated. Strange. Again, debunking all of this climate hysteria. Now, where are you going with this, Alias? Well, I'm going to dabble into what's really going on and how, well, what mankind has done and is doing that's making this worse. We are terraforming, people. We're allowing huge conglomerate corporations to destroy what was once forests into farms.
In the summer of 1910, the western United States ignited. A perfect blend of hot, dry weather and hurricane-force winds fed the blazes, eventually resulting in a terrifying firestorm. In just 2 days, 3 million acres burned, full towns were turned to ash, and nearly 90 people died. Its devastation was so dramatic that it shaped U.S. forest policy for years to come, especially for one new agency. After the 1910 blaze, the U.S. Forest Service primarily focused on stopping fires. And at first, they were really effective. For decades, most accidental and natural forest fires were stopped as quickly as they began. But today we're facing this.
Thousands of firefighters still battling dozens of fires in the West.
More than 85,000 acres burned.
The worst wildfire season in state history.
Scientists are beginning to understand that decades of fire suppression has created dense forests that are ready to ignite in catastrophic ways.
Now I'm going to do what I always do, and we're going to kind of do some serious weaving through, well, to put all of this story together and come to the big picture of where we are today.
But by the 1960s, scientists realized that narrative isn't entirely accurate.
For most of the globe, and particularly the forests in the western U.S., they actually evolved with fire.
Tree rings, soil samples, and charcoal records all show a history of fire, likely started by lightning strikes and other natural phenomena. And that history shows that fire isn't always a destructive force, but an important part of forest ecology.
Fire plays this really important role where it is essentially removing a lot of the older, less productive material from the landscape and is creating pockets and patches of different ages of vegetation. That diversity of ages also produces a diversity of species.
Ah, now this is important, people. Now, there's been a few serious, infestations that are like a phenomena to all of these climate earth scientists. And they're all being backstopped by, again, NGOs and these huge corporations. So you're not seeing real open science. You're seeing forced agenda. You're seeing indoctrination instead of education. There are lots of anomalies that shouldn't be happening. Like this.
So what happened? Why are there more ticks today than there were even just a few decades ago? What changed? What factors contributed to this population explosion? Did the US government have something to do with this? Or did this all happen by chance? Well, these are all great questions, and we are going to answer them in the context of ecology, because ecology points us in the right direction. The explosion in the tick population seems to have something to do with how ecosystems in eastern North America have changed. How have they changed? A lot of people think that eastern North America, at the time of European settlement, was a vast, unbroken expanse of nothing but dense, dark, old-growth forested ecosystems. But this isn't entirely accurate. Wetlands like marshes were common. Tallgrass prairies and grasslands were common. Native American villages and cultivated fields were common. And while wooded ecosystems were certainly abundant, their composition and structure were much different than they are today. Prior to European settlement, many, not all, but many treed landscapes in eastern North America, rather than being dense, dark, closed-canopied ecosystems, were often more like woodlands, savannas, and open forests where ample sunlight could reach the ground level, supporting the growth of herbaceous, rich understories. Why were many of these landscapes open? Well, they were open because they were periodically burned by low to moderate intensity fires from lightning strikes and also from human activity, specifically from indigenous burning practices. Indigenous people burned a lot of land, and their burning practices kept a lot of forests open, relatively dry, and dominated by fire-adapted trees like oaks, chestnuts, and pines. Now, things certainly changed with the arrival of Europeans. Many indigenous land use practices either stopped completely or were significantly altered. But fire, interestingly, continued to be a common occurrence, at least for a few centuries. But it wasn't just fire that kept many landscapes open in the centuries following European settlement. Intensive deforestation for agricultural clearing and timber extraction further contributed to the openness of eastern North America.
Now, if you're a farmer, if you live in the rurals of Canada and, well, anywhere in North America, and you deal with wood ticks, and you deal with weeds, back in the day, we would burn. If wood ticks were starting to get out of control, especially because we'd see it on our livestock, we'd burn. Why? It kills the wood tick. Isn't that amazing? So if you stop nature, if you change the entire environment, what do you get? You get infestations.
There was a time before our ancestors smashed flint and steel together, when they felt the cold lack of fire in their lives. But anthropologists theorize that early hominids relied on lightning to cause forest fires, from which they could collect coals and burning sticks. Fire gave them the ability to cook food and clear land, and became central in many rituals and traditions. So instead of seeing forest fires as an exclusively bad thing, ancient humans may have learned to appreciate them. Yet it wasn't just humans who benefited from these natural phenomena. Even as they destroyed trees, fires also helped the forest themselves, however counterintuitive that seems. In fact, several forest species, such as select conifers, need fire to survive. But how can fire possibly create life, in addition to destroying it? The answer lies in the way that certain forests grow. In the conifer-rich forests of western North America, lodgepole pines constantly seek the sun. Their seeds prefer to grow on open, sunny ground, which pits saplings against each other as each tries to get more light by growing straighter and faster than its neighbors. Over time, generations of slender, lofty lodgepoles form an umbrella-like canopy that shades the forest floor below. But as the tree's pine cones mature to release their twirling seeds, this signals a problem for the lodgepole's future. Very few of these seeds will germinate in the cool, sunless shade created by their towering parents. These trees have adapted to this problem by growing two types of cones. There are the regular annual cones that release seeds spontaneously, and another type called serotinous cones, which need an environmental trigger to free their seeds. Serotinous cones are produced in thousands and are like waterproof time capsules sealed with resinous pitch. Many are able to stay undamaged on the tree for decades. Cones that fall to the ground can be viable for several years as well. But when temperatures get high enough, the cones pop open. Let's see that in action. Once it's gotten started, a coniferous forest fire typically spreads something like this. Flames ravage the thick understory provided by species like Douglas fir, a shade-tolerant tree that's able to thrive under the canopy of lodgepole pines. The fire uses these smaller trees as a stepladder to reach the higher canopy of old lodgepole pines. That ignites a tremendous crown fire, reaching temperatures of up to 2,400 degrees Fahrenheit. That's well more than the 115 to 140 degrees that signal the moment when serotinous seeds can be freed. At those temperatures, the cones burst open, releasing millions of seeds which are carried by the hot air to form new forests.
Did you hear that? They're carried through the air and migrate to other areas. Now, this is where as I would say, the creator, you may say God, or some would say Mother Nature, or Gaia, or whatever, is amazing. Because once these fires ravage these areas, depending on the climate around, certain species do better than others. In most cases, you will start to see deciduous plants and trees grow. These, of course, are natural fire breaks. This also allows for nature, which is all of the insects and the animals, even the lakes, because they feed off certain species of bugs, to change, to adapt to the seasons, to the natural changing climate. While each plant, through nature, has the ability to migrate into other areas or back into that area and grow very well. But when you stop nature for productivity, you get, well, stuff like this.
Don't let their small size fool you. Mountain pine beetles are surprisingly destructive. Their Latin name, Dendroctonus ponderosae, literally means ponderosa tree killer. These insects are only about as big as a grain of rice, with dark, shiny bodies and rounded rear ends. While they typically fly just a mile or so on their own, wind can carry swarms up to 60 miles. allowing infestations to spread rapidly through our forests. Mountain pine beetles use a sophisticated attack strategy. First, female beetles select and attack a tree. Then, they release chemical signals that attract more beetles, and together they can overwhelm even healthy pines. A successful attack means certain death for the tree, which is why early detection is crucial.
Now, what do the environmentalists say to do? They say to, well, you cut the trees down, or you spray them with chemical pesticides, and then you're supposed to shred them. You're supposed to lay them all out in an open sun area so that they can freeze. They even say that you could or should cover them in diesel to kill them. But yet, the whole climate zealots have forgotten that nature has a way of stopping them in their tracks. When this infestation gets so bad, it literally self-destructs because it allows for a tinderbox. That tinderbox incinerates the infestation. We are allowing, through our own manipulation, by governments giving corporations the rights to destroy our forests and give us farms.
This is not a forest. It's a plantation. And plantations were designed with a goal in mind of producing wood. And as a consequence, many attributes of a forest ecosystem are completely lacking. We simplified these forests, or we densified these forests, and so we have forests that are very even-aged, even-sized, even in terms of their structure, very simple. And when you realize that the vast majority of the forests of the Douglas fir region have been harvested and are going to be managed in some way, the question is, how do you want them managed? Because they're now in the hands of investment groups. They manage their lands on short rotations with intense use of herbicides and cut the Douglas fir right when it's just beginning to grow well. We're not even trying to maximize wood production anymore. We're trying, in fact, to maximize capital return for a very small group of investors. But we end up with forests that have high vulnerability to fire and high vulnerability to climate change. And they don't even begin to realize the productive capabilities of these forested sites, which are among the most productive of the world. And we're cutting Douglas fir off at the ankle? What in the hell are you doing? Ultimately, this is not a forest. This is, in fact, a farm for growing wood.
Just like in grasslands, fire is an important process in the forest ecosystem.
Historically in Oklahoma, we have accounts of early travelers, even back in the 1700s, of what they observed. We've also got old photographs around the turn of the century, so we have a pretty good idea of what the forest looked like.
Without fire, a deep layer of litter forms on the ground, keeping herbaceous plants from sprouting. Woody plants dominate. Very little herbaceous forage is available for wildlife and livestock to eat. The trees become crowded, and their growth is reduced due to the competition for nutrients, sunlight, and space. The canopy is closed, allowing very little sunlight to reach the forest floor. This area has been burned with prescribed fire every 4 years for the past 30 years. One of the main reasons for these burns is to reduce the intensity of wildfires and improve wildlife habitat. The reduced leaf litter and increase in sunlight allows the number of herbaceous plants to increase. This area has a 4-year fire frequency as well. But to help reclaim this site faster, marketable pines were harvested and hardwoods thinned with herbicide.
Many times prescribed fire alone just doesn't get the intensity of it because we've let this country go so long without fire in it. So we may have to supplement that with some type of herbicide or possibly some kind of mechanical method to speed up that process so that we can achieve our goals and objectives on what we're wanting with the fire. In areas like these forested areas, there is a possibility that the mechanical method could be timber harvest, whereas you could harvest hardwoods or harvest the softwoods or the pines depending upon timber markets and utilize that along with fire to achieve your goals and objectives.
Thinning and fire.
Now, again, chemicals. They know the benefits of burning, but they can't burn like nature. So their burns aren't intense enough to do what the Creator, Mother Nature, God, or Gaia wants and needs to be done. To me, this is more harmful, again, human climate change than the entire CO2 argument could ever come up with. We are and have completely stopped. We have terraformed our continent, especially Canada.
Spring must be in the air, and that means very soon glyphosate will be too. And from the air, it'll go into all these plants, into our waterways, into our food, and eventually find its way into me and you, and that is kind of a big deal. See, glyphosate, also known as Roundup, is an herbicide that was developed by Bayer, formerly Monsanto, and it has been linked to all sorts of health hazards for humans and wildlife, from things like microbiome disruption, nutrient deficiencies, and inflammatory diseases, to minor things like, I don't know, cancer. So glyphosate acts as a defoliant, which destroys the young, fragile leaves of deciduous plants and trees, preventing them from being able to photosynthesize, starving and eventually killing them. Though the durable waxy leaves of conifer trees are more resistant and relatively unaffected. In addition to widespread uses in the agricultural industry, it has been used by the logging industry for decades as a means of suppressing deciduous trees in recent clear cuts that are seen as competition to the more valuable replanted conifer trees. See, when there's a disturbance in a forest, deciduous trees like aspen, alder, birches, and maples are some of the first to succeed these areas because they're fast growing and they do well in disturbed soils and areas with ample light. As they grow year after year, they return leaf litter to the forest floor loaded with nutrients that bacteria and fungi break down to form a rich topsoil that other successional species use to grow big and healthy, like various conifer species of hemlock, spruce, cedar, pines, and firs that will gradually succeed and mature in this forest stand. However, most logging companies don't actually care about forest health, and neither do the regulators, the Ministry of Forests or the National Forest Service. All they really care about is a different kind of green, getting that money. So they focus on bringing the next harvest of their monoculture tree crops to market as fast as possible. And as a result, when forests are clear-cut, logged, and then replanted, they're often sprayed repeatedly with glyphosate multiple times a year to suppress and kill the deciduous trees they target until the replanted conifer trees are above a certain height and deemed free to grow. Ironically, that lack of plant matter from the deciduous trees and healthy bacteria and fungi in the soil has been shown to lead to nutrient deficiencies over the long term that stunt the growth of those same conifers, which forces these companies to rely heavily on more expensive fertilizers to try and make up the difference. Additionally, when it comes to climate change mitigation, those deciduous trees do a much better job of not only sucking up and storing more carbon in a shorter amount of time, but they also do a better job of shading the forest and retaining moisture levels during the summer, and are much more resilient to wildfire, which is kind of a big deal these days. Now, this is often done without consent and sometimes without notice to the communities who live amongst these forests and rely on them for hunting, foraging, or recreation on what's estimated to be thousands of hectares of forest annually in Canada alone and millions of hectares across the whole of Turtle Island. But no one really knows how much is being sprayed or how often because no one's been keeping track. Like, ever. It's insane. Despite being banned in Europe and many countries around the world for its documented connections to these negative health impacts, it's still widely used in the US and Canada, with the exception of Quebec, who banned its use back in 2001. There are also regulations requiring studies on the broad-scale ecological impact from soil health to wildlife to be done prior to these chemicals being used, yet there has never been a comprehensive one done for glyphosate, a shortcoming the Canadian government is actually being sued for right now.
Aerial spraying herbicides is ecocide. The Canadian government poisons everyone, every animal, the soil, and all water, under the guise of assisting the logging industry. Forest fires are a domino effect of this system. Glyphosate, a potent herbicide and ingredient in Roundup, is sprayed by helicopters and planes over millions of hectares of forest. While sold as a solution for controlling unwanted vegetation, it comes at a grave environmental cost. Studies have linked glyphosate to the contamination of water supplies, the destruction of soil health, and the poisoning of non-target species, including vital pollinators like bees. It's also been found in the bodies of humans, animals, and even in the air we breathe. Spraying promotes the growth of monoculture tree plantations, which are less resilient to pests, droughts, and fires. These areas are highly flammable and contribute to the increasing intensity and frequency of forest fires. Forests that could naturally resist and regenerate are turned into fire hazards. Glyphosate doesn't stay where it's sprayed. It runs off into rivers, lakes, and streams, contaminating drinking water and damaging aquatic ecosystems. The soil, too, becomes more acidic and depleted of essential nutrients, undermining the health of the natural environment. The long-term damage it causes to ecosystems and individuals is vastly disproportionate to the short-term gains of industry giants. These corporations, with the backing of government policies, have continued to poison the land in the name of forest management for over 50 years. Prior to this, Agent Orange was used in Vietnam and Laos, etc. as ecological warfare. Various rainbow name agent chemicals were intentionally tested on Canada as well, and now the spraying of related products is routine. What are we really doing to ourselves? Our planet? Spread the word to everyone you know.
For those who actually live in high forested areas, they see this. When I go to my land in Ontario, this is noticeable. And I don't just mean noticeable. It becomes, if it's all you see, you begin to think that this is a natural forest, when that's the furthest thing from the truth. The truth is when, before, we'll say, the colonizers got here, we didn't have forests that look like what you're seeing today. Some would say, oh, it's an old growth forest. Well, again, there's variance on that depending on where you go. If you were to ask somebody from Vancouver what an old growth forest is, they would say, well, that's ones where the trees are so big and round, you know, it takes 30 people to get their arms around it. Well, in that area, yes, because of the climate, the species of trees that live there and thrive there are huge, like the redwood forest down in the States. But other areas, because they have extreme cold and lower humidity, don't quite get that big, or don't have certain varieties of trees because they can't live. It's too damn cold. Or on the opposite, it's too hot. The basis of what I'm trying to get at is that old growth is different depending on where you go anywhere on the planet, but they all have one thing that is constant, and it's the mix of deciduous and carnivorous living together, and how over long periods of time with natural fire they change and they evolve, they migrate. This whole forest that we see today isn't how it was at all in the past. And the indigenous people who lived here have learnt through time on how to live with nature. And they literally lived in perfect harmony because They allowed natural fires, and they learnt from natural fires on how to use fire in order to control and help the Creator in order to keep their environment, well, not just safe, but productive. We are seeing a shortfall of all types of wildlife because the habitat that they live in now is not natural. It's not natural to live in thousands and thousands of hectares of, well, really dense pines. That's not natural. The foliage that would normally be growing in certain areas underneath deciduous trees has been removed. Now it's become dark. In the darkness, nothing grows. We have changed. We have terraformed everything. There is very little old growth left. BC, for example, because they seem to be the one province that's really been studying it. They figure there's only 1% of old growth left in their entire province. The rest is, as the previous ecologist scientist said, is a farm. It's not natural. This is why you see bears, deer, elk, cougar, rabbit, fox, all the way down to worms, mycelium, all of your fungi growth. Everything has been changed radically fast. This has put huge pressures on all of the ecosystems throughout Americas. Let's see how the indigenous dealt with it.
In many places, fire works as a reset button for the forest. It clears out dead brush and older materials and makes space for new growth. For some species, fire is even vital for reproduction. For example, low-burning fires dry out sequoia tree cones enough for them to open up and drop seeds. At the same time, the fire clears the ground to expose fresh, nutrient-rich soil, which creates ideal conditions for the seeds to germinate. But aside from the ecological benefits, fires also help a forest become more resistant to high-severity burns later on. Low-burning fires clear the forest floor and lower branches from the trees. Then, if a more intense fire moves through the same area, it's slowed down by a lack of fuel.
So when you get those type of patches all over the place, it becomes difficult for fire to move through that landscape again anytime soon.
But decades of suppression have led to a buildup of dry, dead materials in our forests. So we're long past that point of just letting all fires burn.
We've got a forest that has not seen fire, but that it evolved with fire. And so there's all of this buildup in the forest of extra fuel. And it is climate change exacerbating those extreme conditions.
There's just no simple reset button for a century of suppression, or a changing climate. So in order to better adapt to a hotter, drier future, some are turning to a centuries-old practice. Indigenous people have long understood the value of fire, and for millennia before colonization, would burn sections of the forest on purpose.
We have a history of our men burning our hunting grounds. Women will burn to restore their food gathering sites. So, burning is just a key tool that we use as Indigenous people to keep our environment healthy.
But colonists began placing strict laws against burning as early as 1850, criminalizing the long-held practice. After the 1910 blaze, legislation against all burning only became more strict.
Indigenous people could be shot for burning.
And now, we're looking to them to lead the way. Prescribed or controlled burns draw on those cultural Indigenous practices.
Most people think, these guys just go out and burn whenever they want to. God, I wish it was that easy. We go before the counties to get their permits. We go before our tribal councils to get their permission and their permits to burn on tribal land. We go before the tribal air quality. We go before the county's air quality. And then I work with NOAA to predict my weather throughout that week while we're burning. Once we have ignition, everybody falls into the place they need to be in. They have their tools ready. They have their radios on. We all know where everybody is at every moment.
The fire started and these controlled burns move slowly across the forest floor and clears out the buildup of dead material. If the wind shifts or the fire gets too high, it's quickly contained and put out by the trained crew.
You know, there's not one piece of our day that isn't choreographed.
In 2020 and 2021, lawmakers introduced bills to increase the use of controlled burning nationwide. It's a start, but it won't be enough on its own.
So the indigenous were using fire in two different aspects. One, because they knew that if the forest was too dark, it couldn't grow the proper nutrients needed for the wildlife they hunted, which they'd starve. As well as the other end from the gathering part of it, where they knew that, once again, same thing, berries and other edibles that they picked and lived off of couldn't thrive. They understood this cycle. They didn't stop nature from igniting huge fires. Yeah, there were probably a lot of tribes that perished because of this. But it wasn't looked upon as a bad thing. It was a necessity. Something that we've completely removed from our system, all in the name of profit, and nobody knows the wiser. Nobody's actually looking into the realities of what we are doing to our entire ecosystem.
Now, some of you might recognize this term, a lot of you won't, but what you might recognize is Roundup. So glyphosate is the active ingredient in Roundup. It is a chemical, and it's actually the subject of over 100,000 court cases in the US. Now, I should say glyphosate is used as a herbicide, so it kills plants, fungi, and bacteria, and corporations will hire people to go spray forests, and it's often the people who are hired to spray end up developing cancer, and that's the cause of all of these court cases in the US. There's also been studies showing its impact on gut health, because we all know what we need for good gut health is healthy bacteria. Glyphosate directly harms bacteria, which is in your stomach. It also has some reproduction issues that are coming out. New research is showing us that. And it's still green lighted for use in Canada and the US. Now, many countries have banned it. And actually, like I just said, in Quebec, it's banned from logging practices. So in BC, Canada, and the rest of the province, it's used in many sectors. You have the agricultural sector using it. You'll even find it used in residential settings on turf lawns and even school grounds. And we also use it in our forestry sector. So logging corporations will use it to basically kill off any competition. I'll get into that in a little second. And we're finally finding that, it's not as good as we thought it was. So even from a logging company perspective, spraying glyphosate and killing everything might not be as beneficial as we thought. Now, indigenous knowledge and some new Western science are proving that healthy ecosystems also include, like I said, sharing resources, trading of resources, trading of information. Alders form a tripartite symbiosis with fungi and nitrogen-fixing bacteria called actinobacteria. You can actually see this on alders. They kind of show up as like little yellowy orange brain-like growths. But that's actually the way that alders are able to fix nitrogen from the air, capture it, and turn it into a way that's usable for plants to take it up in the soil. So that's 3 species working together in order to benefit the entire ecosystem. We're also finding that birch trees actually share carbon to Douglas fir through fungi connections underground. So just right there, that's another 3 species working together to allow all of the species to thrive. And when they share these resources is when the other species needs it the most also. We're finding that large old trees, this is based on Suzanne Simard's research, known as mother trees, exchange nutrients and help one another by sending signals that communicate about pests and other environmental threats. And they can also send their resources to their offspring as they die. So it's like a final gift. As they're dying, they'll send out a flush of carbon to their saplings to hopefully make sure that they're able to live on past whatever threat just killed the mother tree. So these findings directly contradict this Darwin's idea of cutthroat competition being the only thing that matters in a species' survival. And yet Canada's and the US's forest policies are built on this assumption. And the fallout of this means that we are poisoning the land, poisoning wildlife and water and human communities for the supposed benefits that might not even be happening.
And then you have the other aspect where you have protected forests from logging, and they still have fire suppression ideology. Fire bad. And this process is also destroying those habitats.
Forests across the eastern U.S. are changing. Once dominated by oak and hickory, these landscapes are increasingly filled with less fire-adapted species like red maple. Fire exclusion has allowed these mesophytic species to thrive, altering both forest, structure, and function. This process, called mesification, occurs when fire-intolerant, shade-loving species outcompete fire-adapted species. Over time, they create cooler, shadier, and more moisture-rich conditions, which further suppress fire and reinforces the dominance of trees like red maple. So, some of y'all, like me, have probably scratched your head at the word mesification. And on the other hand, some of y'all have already probably figured out that mesification comes from the root word mesic, and that refers to a habitat that has a moderate amount of moisture. So the exclusion of fire has allowed mesophytic species to thrive, altering the composition of these ecosystems. In today's video, we're going to explore how fire...
Now, because of this being seen, they've created this word, mesification. And through all of the years studying this whole, climate alarmism and stopping nature, and now I've known about them spraying the glyphosate for a long time. Fires are good, but you put mass populations in an area who don't understand nature and don't have the ability to protect themselves, then yes, fire is bad. There's no doubt about that. But nobody's come up with a term for the opposite of mesification. So I'm going to make one up. I'm going to call it aridicification, from the root word, again, meaning dry or parched, which is what we're doing by allowing corporations to destroy our forests and create what we see today. All of this carnivorous, dark tinder sticks that are being infested by bugs, killing off the habitats of all of the animals that should be there thriving, changing the entire, carbon footprint. Now imagine, so we know that deciduous trees are better vacuums to carbon than deciduous trees. And yet we've removed something like 78-80% of them from Canada through the use of glyphosate. We have literally terraformed our country. Aridicification is real. We're seeing it in real time. Come spring, they're going to be out there spraying in full force. They do it all year, causing a domino effect, which just seems to line up with this idea of the climate scare. Temperatures rising are creating more intense fires. That's the furthest thing from the truth. Humans allowing corporations to kill off all the dead old forests, not dead, but old forests, old growth, and change the entire environment, the entire ecosystem, and planting matchsticks is the reason we're seeing it. And then add into that all of the leftist loonies that are out there purposefully lighting these fires to try and scare people into thinking, oh, man-made climate change. It's man-made environmental disaster, not climate disaster. This is the reality of where we are today. And why do you think out east, after all those forest fires, they were spraying Roundup? Think carefully. This is what the last generation grew up, and the next generation and the kids right now think a forest in Canada is supposed to look like.
That helicopter is spraying an herbicide called glyphosate. And once it passes over, the aspen and birch may not grow back for 100 years, allowing coniferous trees like pines to prosper.
So in 2012, this place was chock full of aspen trees and the pine trees. And so the aspen was seen as a threat to these pine, and they sprayed it. But the year after they sprayed it, it just looked like a moonscape in here. Everything was dead, except for the pine trees. To people who don't really get out in the woods a lot, this looks pretty good, right? It's really green in here. The trees are growing really quickly, but it's one type of tree. Now we have pretty much a pine monoculture.
It's an effective practice for BC's timber industry. One species of tree delivered to the same mill, processed in the same way. It's easier, cheaper. And it's the rule if you want to harvest on Crown land.
It's the rule. Now, when you buy land, you end up finding out that, especially if you get the surface rights, now if you're interested in buying land, you got to make sure that you ascertain all the rights to it. Now, in some provinces, that's impossible because the governments have taken away the mineral rights, which is, that again is a whole nother story. But you think you own all the trees when you get the surface rights. That's not true. When you own a certain amount of acres or more, you lose the rights to certain trees. Which trees? Well, deciduous. Yellow pine, Douglas fir, the lodge, and all the rest of them. Because they're owned by the government. So you have to pay a stump fee. That is how extreme the governments are. That is how tied to corporatism they are. They saw the profit in it. They've allowed these corporations to completely desiccate our entire forests for profit, to the point where anything underwater is Crown, and certain species of trees is Crown. Hell, there's even chain law, which is where if you own land by a lake, you can't build your house right close to the lake. You got to go in, you got to get a lawyer, you got to get a permit, you got to get all of this extra government. The government is anti-environment. This liberal government is one of the worst. In 10 years, the last 10 years, knowing that we are a carbon sink, a carbon vacuum, if we would have been exporting our oil and gas, we could have reduced the carbon footprint of other nations. They themselves and every liberal supporter are ignorant to the fact of, well, they're causing more harm than good. And now that's if you believe the entire fake green scare. I'm just here to give you the truth. Sorry, so sorry, just the truth, just the facts. This is the reality of where we are today. So, one more time, this is 485 million years of the surface temperature of the Earth. The reality of where we actually are today, which if you were to look at it, you could say we are heading towards an ice age. So, do you want to freeze to death? Or would you rather be somewhere up here nearing the peaks where there is record abundances of life and foliage? This is what mainstream won't show you. Governments won't show you. Everything they do is for profit. Mark Carney, Brookfield, the global elite, the WEF, our entire government is corrupt to the core. This is the reality of Canada. So when you go out to your local forest, or if you live in the bush, and you obviously see this around you, which I see in my land up in Ontario, old growth is soon to be a thing of the past, all in the name of profit. That's just the truth. Now, I was going to do a show kind of exposing the Carney thing. I'm still waiting for evidence to see what happened to yesterday's deadline. Nothing's being said. That is usually a pretty good indicator that I was right. Carney's held over a barrel. Carney's owned. And by the promise of $1 trillion being invested down in the States, pretty much seals our fate. Companies are leaving Canada. They're all profiting off it. Our entire ecosystem's being destroyed. All in the name of fake climate change. Climate change is real. It's been happening since the beginning of our planet. That is the truth. I hope you enjoyed today's episode. Until next time, make sure you like, share, and subscribe. If you're new, punch that notification bell. It not only helps grow the channel and help break the censorship I am constantly under, you won't miss any future episodes. Until the next time, guys, I'm Alias Tagay. You've watched the Canadian Citizen Journal. Stay informed.